Welcome to On the Mark. I'm your host, Mark Rubin. I am so excited to present this podcast series addressing our rapidly changing world and how it is affecting industries and people in unique and interesting ways. As John F. Kennedy once said, change is the law of life, and those who look only to the past or present are certain to miss the future. The business leaders and personalities who I will be interviewing in these podcasts certainly look to the future. And I hope you come away with information and inspiration that helps you adapt in both your business and personal lives. You can find these podcasts on all major platforms, including YouTube, LinkedIn, Facebook, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our website, getsplatzer.com. Good morning. This is Howard Rubin. I'm your host. And I am so excited today's episode. Normally, I have people who are business people who are talking about real estate or banking or things that sometimes are interesting, sometimes not interesting. But today I have someone really special. I have Gianni Russo. If you don't know who that is, he's probably the most famous for playing Carlo in The Godfather. But he's got a long and storied career that spans many fields. We can talk about the mob. He's a famous author. He's written a book that's one of my favorite books called The Hollywood Godfather. When I lost my copy, I had to go out and buy another one because I had to have it because I always refer to it. I know he's written things since then. He does his own podcasting. He has a terrific cabaret show that I've seen. And he's I met him through a charity. He's a very charitable guy. And for years, we worked together at St. Francis food pantries and kitchens, raised a lot of money for a lot of different people. And I know he's involved in other charities. But what we're going to be talking about today is because he's basically in the entertainment business. That's really what he does. So we're going to talk about, as we talk about changes, we're going to talk about how changes in the entertainment industry have happened with after COVID and with the AI, and how he's addressed that in what he does. Gianni, welcome to On the Mark.
Good morning, and thank you for having me, man. I didn't realize we had such a history. It's great,
yes,
though.
We do, but you know, I was the dinner chairman for many years. We've met many times, but evidently I didn't make that much of an impression that you remembered me. But I've been I've won an auction where we went to dinner at your house with people. That's
the dining room table. 16 people.
Right,
it sits right behind me.
You go to his house, which is a terrific event in itself. On the walls are all the Godfather memorabilia. He owns. He was astute enough to buy a lot of the Godfather related trademarks, and you see things on the wall about the olive oil company that the Godfather, that was in the Godfather movie and everything else. But he's more than just the Godfather character. He's an entertainer. And Gianni, so let's start with, tell us what you're doing today and what you're up to.
Well, actually, today I had just got back. I did a great weekend for Valentine's Day. I was at Bernie's by David Burke in Bernardsville, New Jersey. I couldn't believe it. And I knew David Burke now for 31 years. He started on my block on 61st Street with a restaurant, and he's really expanded. The man is such a culinary wizard, basically. And so I was there Friday night, and it was interesting. We sold out the room I was supposed to be in for like 100 people. Then they kept calling in, unbeknownst to me, and he kept booking it, and they were booking it to see me in the other rooms on closed circuit television, not even to see me in person. They still wanted to come. We had 240 people. It was such an amazing night for me. And being with as I said, David and I feel like I helped raise them. And then I went on to Boston and did 2 shows up there in a room. I thought I was going to meet with the mob. It was up in South Boston, and it's called Capo. And I thought maybe I was going to meet some capos there. They run it that way, though. They really run it. The guy who runs it, this guy, Rich, he does Sinatra like so many other people do, but he really nailed it with the microphone, the room. So I did that room, and then it was just a crazy weekend. I did 3 shows up there and had a blast. And now I'm home, and that's all I'm doing right now. I turned the book into a musical. It's an 80-minute show. And I chronologically take you through my life. And I have photographs, as you know today. You could research things like I made 46 motion pictures. A lot of them were, period pieces other than Godfather, like Seabiscuit and all that. So I have a guy that works with me now, Mike Austin. He actually found a picture of me when I had polio in 1949. I was in a full body brace for 6 months. And unbeknownst to me, because I was a ward of the state of New York for 5 years, I was the poster boy for the March of Dimes.
Hmm.
And so I had all of this in it. So I introduced the audience to me at 6.5 and take you to where I am now. And it's been really well received. I'm playing it all over the world. I know you just came back from Vegas. I'm going to the Westgate, which I have tremendous memory of, because I was there when Kirk Kerkorian opened it with Streisand for 2 weeks, and then Elvis.
Wow.
So
I know. I also know David Burke. In fact, I think he's going to be a podcast guest. He's scheduled for later in the season. Terrific chef, but really more of an entrepreneur than a chef.
Oh my God! Yeah.
I would say, and what he's done. But let's talk about how AI and how the COVID has affected your business and what you do. I know for a guy who's not a youngster, you're very tech savvy, and you know how to use social media, and you know how to adapt to what's going on and what the changes are. But tell me how AI and the modern world and how that's affected you.
Well, it's so interesting because I had the opportunity, fortunately and unfortunately, to compare. Even when I was in the first epidemic that the world really knew, polio in 1949.
Right.
We watched 2,300 kids die, and I was in a 20-bed ward down in Bellevue because they, like COVID, they didn't know how to handle it. And we were all quarantined, and kids were dropping like flies. And the problem was, even with the COVID, once they realized, and I don't know how many people in your audience know that, once they realized you should be sleeping on your side, your lungs got cleared. It was just rolling a patient over.
Huh.
I don't know how many people died for the first 6 months. And
Wow.
that's basically, I was part of Jonas Salt's experiment, which took a little longer than COVID. I was in the program for about 5 years. I went in the hospital at 6.5 and I came out at 12.5. So that's how long I was there. And so, I've had a tremendous experience, unfortunately, to learn how to cope even. Because, when I was in that ward, there was no televisions, there's no radio. They never thought we would survive, so they didn't educate us. So basically, scholastically, I'm probably on a level of an undergraded student who's done.
You're a pretty smart guy. Why don't we? I don't want to go too much into your book and the history, but
Right.
I'd like you to at least go into the story of how you got into the Godfather movie. How it's such a fascinating story on how you got involved in the movie. So why don't you tell our audience a little about that, how that came about?
Well, was interesting because I left the country for about 3 years after the Kennedy assassination. They were trying to involve me. I was just a messenger for Frank Costello, to be point blank. And he was involved with Joe Kennedy early on. And while I was away, a book came out called The Godfather. So I had someone read it to me because I couldn't read it. To read 300 pages, I'd still be reading it probably. But they read it to me, and while they were reading it to me, I felt I could play Michael, Sonny, or Carlo. Carlo would have been my last choice. So with that said, I was pretty wealthy already by that time. We're talking about I'm 25.
But you didn't really have an acting credits at that point. You really weren't.
I didn't act
You had no acting.
As you know, you and I are on stage no matter what. We don't need. We act every day.
Right.
So to me, that I have life as an experience as an actor.
Right.
But with your saying, I had no formal training.
Right.
I hired a cameraman, and the good news, I shot it on 18 millimeter mag stripe film, which I know nothing about film either.
Mm-hmm.
And the guy sold me a bad container of film, which made me a movie star because the film was old and it came out sepia tone rather than color.
Oh,
And I didn't know that Coppola wanted to shoot this in a sepia look. It would be the first film, not black and white, not color, but sepia. So when I did the test, I did a scene for, like I said, for Michael, James Caan, Sonny, and then Carlo. They passed my test around to show Bobby Evans and Stanley Jaffe and Al Ruddy, everybody involved in the film, what the sepia looks like. So they all got to know me unbeknownst to me. So I'm seeing what's going on, and then I'm reading the newspaper, and I remember the date specifically. It was June 28th, 1971. Joe Colombo, who I met early on in life with the rest of the mobsters in New York, had created an association called the Italian Anti-Defamation League. And he had his first rally on June 28th, 1971.
and as I recall, that was to be he was protesting The Godfather being a movie, right? He was
Always protesting.
they were very adamant against The Godfather being made. They thought it was
Well, not only that, his son got arrested, Joe Jr.,
right.
and they were picketing the FBI building, saying that the FBI, we changed the name to FBI. Everybody knows it's Federal Bureau of Investigation, but that time we called it Forever Bothering Italians. So I was involved with raising a buck, a button, and all that for this league. And they have the first rally, and police get stabbed. 100,000 people show up.
Wow.
And then they had all kinds of problems. And they hired a young lawyer at the time, Barry Schlotnick.
Yeah, I know Barry.
Went on to like.
I know Barry. Yeah.
In fact, I'm still reading James Patterson's book about him. It's a fabulous book.
Yeah.
And he's been my attorney for a long time. And he actually, because of him being in the position he was as the attorney, saved my life. You're not going to believe this. He saved my life because I get a call the morning of the next rally by Tommy Bellotti, and Tommy Bellotti became a household name because he was shot down with Paul Costello in front of Sparks. And he called me up and he said, "Are you going to the rally today?" I said, "Yeah." He said, "But Gambino don't want you to go." I said, "What are you talking about? The guy got me the part in the movie." And he said, "You can't go." And he hung up on me. So I'm saying to myself, how am I going to do this? Thank God I called Barry Schlotnick. I said, "Barry, you got to do me a favor." Because it was already like 9:30 in the morning. I had to beat up the block in, in a half hour. I said, "Tell Joe I'm sorry, but I have a stomach flu. I'm not sitting on any dais. I'm sitting on the toilet most of the day. And I really apologize to him. If I didn't make that call, I'd be dead today." Because what happened, I didn't go to the rally. I went down on Mulberry Street. It was a great day, 28th of June, sitting outside, and they shot Joe Colombo at close range, put him in a cone for 5 years. My biggest problem, well, one of my biggest problems, because I've had a lot of them, but this one, when they're investigating the crime scene, they notice there's one chair on the dais, and when they zoom in on it, it says Gianni Russo.
Huh.
So now the FBI wanted to know why wasn't I there. New York Crime Bureau wanted to know why I wasn't there, and the Colombo family wanted to know why I wasn't there. So I go see Costello now. I said, "I got a major problem." He said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Well, I was supposed to go to the rally yesterday, and Tommy Bellotti told me not to go, and I didn't go." So what's the problem? I said, "The FBI is looking for me because my seat was empty and had my name on it." So he says to me, go down to Vegas, go to the Tropicana Hotel. I own it. He said these kind of things to me all the time. I was in shock. He's asked for Nick Tano. He's the manager. Just stay there until I straighten this out. And that's what went on. And to me, it was a situation. I got the part because of Joe. I came into New York prior to the rallies at all. They had one rally. And I said, "You're protesting the book." I said, we can make a lot of money. And he emphasized me saying we. We? He said. I said, yeah. I said, I have this idea. I said, if you let Barry read the script, now that you hired him, anything you think that's defaming the Italians, if they take it out and agree, you get the cooperation of all the neighborhoods and the locations and the union, and then we can make a lot of money. So how we're going to make money. I said, if you get all that done, you're going to ask for all the world premieres in every city, and we could sell the tickets for a couple $100 because it's going to your charity. And with that, he looks at Barry, says, what do you think of, Barry? He said, sounds like a good idea. He said, can you do that? I said, give me permission. I'll go and talk. And the league's office was on Madison Avenue. So I just had to walk up 59th Street because their office was at the Columbus Circle building, which is now Trump Castle or Trump, whatever, Plaza, one of the Trump buildings. So I went there, and I'm there in the morning, and they're all coming in. They're all noticing me because of the screen test. I didn't know how they even knew me. So Ruddy comes over. He said, what are you doing here? I said, well, you got a big problem in New York. Said, we have no problems. And Bobby Evans was standing with him, and I knew Bobby, and just because of who he was. And I said, I just left Joe Colombo. He said, you just left Joe Colombo? I said, yeah. He wants to meet. They all looked at each other. They said, can you bring him here? I said, yeah. So the next day, that's what happened. Man, I'm trying to make the story too long. I don't want to make it too long.
Yeah.
So the next day we come, and I told Joe, I said, Joe, they're doing a movie called The Godfather. Let's take two heavies with us. So that's when he took Lenny Montana. That's how he was introduced to them.
Oh,
the part of Luca Brasi.
Yeah,
he
was great. Yeah,
and he was collecting money for them. And the other guy we took was Butter Esther Chico, another big guy. So the five of us go up there. The two bodyguards, Barry, Joe, and myself. And they're going over everything, and they're resolving everything. They're shaking hands, and they're getting up. And I said, Joe, I stayed seated. I said, Joe, what about me? So he said, yeah, what about my boy? So Ruddy chimed in. Oh, we'll give him a part. Don't worry about it. Are you in the union? I said, no, I'm not in the union. He said, well, we'll give you a part. I said, Joe, tell him to sit down. He didn't say anything to sit down. He raised his hand, and they all sat down like puppets. So I got up. I said, listen, he wouldn't be here unless I brought him here. I said, who's playing Michael? They said, this is going to shock your audience. They said, James Caan is playing Michael. I said, who's playing Sonny? They said, Carmine Caridi. He's in a big Broadway play, The Man from La Mancha. They thought Sonny should be this big guy, and that's Carmine was. I said, who's playing Carlo? They said, we didn't get to that part yet. I said, Joe, I want to play that part. So he tells them he's playing Carlo, and they all look at each other. They're like windshield wipers. What are we doing here? And Joe said, listen, you want me to help you? He plays Carlo. You agree to it now, or I'm out of here. And that's how I got the part. I didn't.
and then I don't want to go. I know because we've had this conversation in the past. Marlon Brando wasn't so happy initially with you getting the part. Isn't
he
that
wasn't
right?
getting fired.
Right. So how did you make peace with Marlon Brando? That's a great story.
What happened was everybody I told, I'm in the movie. They go, get out of here. Because, the book was in like third print already.
Right.
Everybody wanted to be in the movie. And everybody I said I was in it, they all told me a liar. So the good news, the first rehearsal was Patsy's 119th Street, which I used to go up there all the time. It's about Tony Salerno's place. I used to bring overnight loans up there for Costello for the Ziganet game. So the rehearsal was 3:00. I went up around 2. They see me there. All of them are there. Danny Pagano, Fat Tony Salerno. They said, what are you doing here? I said, I'm here for the rehearsal. They said, for what? The Godfather? I said, yeah. But what are you going to do in it? I said, I got a big part. I got a big part called Carlo. Get out of here. Nobody ever believed me. So now I go into the room. The whole cast is there. I've never been at a rehearsal before in my life. And Coppola tells the room, Pacino, everybody's in the room. That's got the primary parts. And they said, I want all the Italians to exaggerate your mannerisms, eating, hand gestures, and your talk. Because all the non-Italians, Marlon Brando being Polish, James Caan being Jewish, have to become Italian in this room in the next 5 days. And they said, now before we bring Brando in, I want nobody to approach him. None of you thespians, guy, you all want to talk to him. And that was it. We rehearsed for 45 minutes to an hour. They take a break. Brando comes over to me. He says, you're a big TV actor. I said, no. He says, you got a big film coming out. I said, no. He says, who'd you study with? I said, this is a quiz show. What are you doing? He says, well, who'd you study with? I said, I didn't study what? What are you talking about? And with this, he calls Coppola over. And Coppola didn't hire me. That's how I got the part. I was a gift. That's who's playing Carlo. You got to play him.
Right.
So we get into dialogue, and he's telling him, because I never broke the script down. I didn't even know how to do that. He says, the guy marries my daughter, gets my son Sonny killed. The Barzini undermines the family and drags my son Michael in. This guy's got to be a great actor. And I'm realizing he's trying to get me fired. So I've never been on even a rehearsal. I said, Francis, do me a favor, go over there a minute. I didn't know I couldn't dismiss the director. Even in a rehearsal, you can't dismiss the director.
Right. Yeah.
And the director left. Now the room goes silent, like who's this guy? And let me specify one thing. I'm in a Brioni suit. These people look dressed worse than my gardener. Diane Keane, her hair was all shriveled, combat boots on. I'm all dressed. So I said, Mr. Brando, come with me. Now, you're not supposed to talk to him. I put my arm around him and walked him to the back of the room because I knew there was no zig and neck game, but I didn't want to embarrass the guy. So I'm nose to nose with him. I said, listen to me carefully, okay? You get me fired here today, I will suck on your heart. You will bleed out here right now. You can't embarrass me like this. He's looking at me. He steps back. He says, that was brilliant. You could really act. He thought I was acting. I was ready to take And then we became the best of friends from that point on.
It's a fascinating story, and you had a long and storied career in film after that. That I know. But
I made 46 motion pictures.
Yeah, and people don't really know. I don't think people really know that you're so, when you make such an iconic film, people think that you're just attached to that film, such as like William Shatner will always be with Star Trek, and you're always going to be with Godfather, and
which I'm very happy with because
you didn't mind being typecast. I mean, you were typecast.
Yeah,
you were basically, then that's what you did, and you went from that to the cabaret, the Frank Sinatra type. Not that you.
Well, he was my mentor all along.
Yeah, but you don't imitate him. You're different than Frank Sinatra, but you're that type of thing. Let me ask you something else. That always, my family. I don't tell a lot of people this, but my family was also involved in the mob. I had an uncle who was the right-hand man of Matty the Horse Iannello.
Wow.
I don't know if you know Matty the Horse.
I know Matty well.
He controlled the Midtown bars, and my uncle, now deceased, his name was Carl Moskowitz. Jewish guy, but he was very heavy in the mob, and his picture was on the front page of the Times when I was graduating law school because he was arrested.
That went over big.
Yeah, that didn't, and my family didn't know. A bunch of Jews, they didn't understand how come Carl's brother has all these not slot machines. What do we call it? Jukeboxes in the Midtown restaurants, because that was something that was controlled by the mob.
Yeah.
Anyway, I always found it to be interesting how, Italians, I think, have been discriminated against. They've been stereotyped and pigeon typed as being gangsters, but no one seemed to be upset when the Anti-Defamation League was clearly run by the mob, and it kind of was almost like if I was an Italian, most Italians are hardworking, people, that I would be upset. And I wonder if anyone, or if you ever thought about this, I would be upset if the stereotype to try to destroy the stereotype of mobsters, being all Italians, is the Anti-Defamation League was run all by Italians, and I know some of the mobsters didn't like the fact that Colombo did this and put himself, in front. And
I know that. No, and you're so right, because the most affluent professional Italians hated that association.
Right.
In fact, I was a part of the Columbus Club years ago before I did The Godfather. Angelo Ponti, who owned Ponti's restaurant and was a big landlord downtown, he brought me in. They sponsored me. And why I'm bringing it out is because of specifically what you're talking about. The educated Italians did not like that association, that everybody Italian is in the mob.
Right.
When I made the movie, they asked me to leave the club. I can't believe it. And I'm glad they did, because it was a boring club anyway. We'd go there for dinner once a month, and it was a lot of dues. And they asked me to leave the club. They didn't know they did me a favor. Most people want to be a part of it.
Right.
But with the association, and see me, I knew, but one of the closest friends to Frank Costello was Meyer Lansky. I met Meyer early on in Florida.
Yeah.
So I knew who created the syndicate. It was Meyer Lansky and Frank Costello. And that's when they got so powerful. And
Bugsy Siegel was also with you when it was.
Oh, yeah.
Bugsy,
all of them. That was crazy.
They said I was in the Mob Museum in Las Vegas a few days ago. And really the Mob Museum, there's a lot of prominent Jews that were in the mob. Yeah. It wasn't just Italians, but Italians, were up front. Let me ask you this question.
One of the most prominent Jews that I know was a guy called Hank Greenspun. He owned the Sun newspaper. I spent 30 years in Vegas. Nobody knew that. I went down there to be the eyes and ears for a couple of casinos, and I got close to him. And it only came out now that he's passed. He was one of the biggest suppliers of arms to Israel.
Really? Wow.
He was, and when you talk about, and you were just in Vegas, Green Valley, he owned all that property. That's why they call it Green Valley. It's Greenspun. And his son Brian and the whole family, they're still there running magazines, and they're still in publishing, but they're legitimate people. The father was legitimate, but he just backed the Israeli army with the money he was making here. But I mean, one of my oldest friends and one of the most prominent attorneys in the world now, he's 92. I've been friends with him since I'm 16. Is Al Malnick. He's one of the most prominent attorneys in the world. Mm-hmm. And I talk to him. I don't do a thing without talking to Al. He reads my stuff. He does everything. He's great.
And let me ask you about the mob today. I mean, the mob, the Costa Nostra, I know they don't like to use the word mafia. That was in The Godfather. They had to agree not to use that term as part of the negotiations. But the mob today is so diverse in terms of ethnic.
Oh my God!
It seems to have been every ethnic. The mob seems to be, for the most part, different ethnic groups. It doesn't say that there's the Colombians, there's the Albanians, there's. Yeah, I don't think, is the Italian mob still a substantial factor in crime today? It seems to not be.
The funniest thing about you saying that is that the two main characters destroyed the Italian mob. One was John Gotti, and the other was Tony Spilotro in Chicago. He destroyed the outfit totally. He disclosed every casino that was controlled by the mob. People didn't realize the casinos in Vegas, why you never had a problem. Each casino was owned by a mob family from a city. I can name every one. The Dunes was New England. Riviera was Detroit. The biggest guys, they had the Desert Inn, and the Stardust was Chicago outfit. So that's why there was no problems. There was no problem collecting money. There was no problem, no crimes, nothing. They sent Tony Spilotro. He destroyed the place. And what John did here, after he saw The Godfather, he stopped wearing his sweatpants and started dressing and acting like Sonny Corleone.
Right. It's interesting that Las Vegas today, I think it's probably safe to say, doesn't have a mob influence. That they're
No,
completely out of the mob, right?
I was there during the transition. This is part of American history. So, like I told you, I got there in '59, I left in '89, and you know why I left.
Right.
So, but the interesting thing is, and you probably never heard this before. The United States government gave Howard Hughes a helicopter contract during the Vietnam War, and with the understanding that the profits from that he would buy up Vegas for them because they're not allowed to be in free enterprise. But they knew they had to get into it to learn how all this money was being siphoned. So Howard Hughes started buying hotels. I got to be friends with Howard Hughes for a minute. He was living in a Dissident Hotel, which was controlled by Chicago. And he took the penthouse floor up there. And then they tried to throw him out. He bought the place. And he stayed another year or two. But why I'm bringing it up, if you just looked at who was in command, Bill Dana, Bob Mayhew, they were all CIA, FBI guys. They were the head, but they had to get into the business. The good news for me, they kept a lot of the mob running hotels in the casino because they couldn't learn the business that fast. Some of the guys were still there, and they didn't realize about there was 2 count rooms. When they came to the table and they opened the gate on the outside cage so everybody could see the money go in legitimately. When it went to the next room, the mob had that room. They took what they wanted and they passed it on. Nobody knew where the money went.
Wow.
And I was a part of that for years. It's in my book. That's why I could talk about it. But the skim is what they, I know exactly the number. Nick Nitty, Frank Nitty's kid, and me, we were a runner. I actually was a runner and was licensed by Lloyd's of London as a courier. And I was bringing the money to the Vatican. I got stopped at airports and I showed them the letter. They couldn't stop me. I had a handcuff onto the bag. I always had $2 or $3 million. They knew what was going on. I solicited subpoena my boss. How are they going to subpoena the Pope? You can't. It's a different country. And I did that for another 6 years, and then I got out. But,
was the Marlon Brando character based on a real mob boss, or was that just a composite of different mob bosses?
No, I had that conversation with Mario Puzo. It was based on 3 guys. The olive oil guy was, but oh Jesus, I know him well. They own olive oil companies. Joe, he had his own family, and then that's how Joe Colombo got it. He
Joe
got
Pasacci? Was it Joe Pasacci?
Yeah, they
Pasacci.
took out Pafacci. That was the olive oil guy.
Yeah.
The guy who had all the politicians in his pocket was Frank Costello, and then the image that Brando actually had, or Vito Corleone had, was of Carlo Gambino.
And was that great? The great scene, probably the most famous scene in The Godfather to me, was the horse's head scene when he goes into the. Is that based on an actual event that something like that actually happened, or was that something?
A guy who had trained. Well, it was based on that same thing where they were trying to get supposedly Sinatra the part in Here to Eternity, and that's why Frank was so livid about it, because I don't know if you know how he got the part. Ava Gardner got him the part.
Really? Wow.
Well, what happened, most people don't know this. Frank was so in love with Ava, and I was so close to Sinatra by that time. And he had an apartment on 71st Street up here on East End. And the neighbor, a guy called Dick Wolf, who was an agent at William Morris, had an apartment in the same building. And they smelled gas coming out of his apartment. And they called the super. The super called William Morris, said, "There's gas coming out of your apartment. We have to go in." And they let him in. Sinatra was, half his body was in his oven. He was trying to kill himself. And the damage he did to his vocal cords, that's why he didn't sing for 2 years. and he was out of the business basically. And Ava Gardner knew she did that to him and wanted him to get that part. But Cohen said there's no way he's getting that part. She went to Cohen's wife. Ava did. I can't believe this story. I think nobody ever told the story. And she said, your husband is trying to bed me for years. I want to go to Acapulco with him for the weekend, but I won't do it without your permission because you was friends with her. Cohen's wife said, you're going to sleep with that dirty old man? He stinks. She said, I have to do it for Sinatra. And his wife approved it. She didn't care anyway because he was sleeping around.
Wow.
And she went with Sinatra, I mean, with Cohen for three days. And that's how we got the part. That's why Sinatra was so mad at Mario Puzo, letting him think that he got the part because of the mob, because that killed him until he went to his grave, that she would do that to him.
I know that Frank and you have something in common other than that you're both prolific ladies' men. I know.
Well, not only that, you know what's so funny? When I was in polio ward, Dolores Barone was from the neighborhood, Mulberry Street, and she was my floor nurse. And I got in there August 7th, and my birthday was coming. It was December 12th. And I was really depressed because I said, is my mother and father coming? Nobody's coming? She said, Johnny, you're highly contagious. Nobody can come. So she brought me a transistor radio, which is part of my show. I own it. 75 years I've had this little transistor radio. And I turned it on that morning at 6 o'clock in the morning. I had it under the covers because there was I had to listen to it low. And I'm hearing all the accolades about Frank Sinatra. He was born December 12th. He was from Hoboken, humble beginnings. His mother was a barmaid. His father worked at Todd Shipyard. He was part of the Hoboken Five, a singing group. And then he became who he was.
Right.
Now, I'm in the hospital. I'm 12 blocks away from him. I'm on 30th Street in the East End in Bellevue. And he's at the New York Paramount in 1949 doing 5 shows a day. Well, he encouraged me. And then a few years when I went to work for Costello, who owned the Copa, I met him, a couple of years later when he was doing a rehearsal and a sound check. And I told him the story. And we remained friends until he died for 49 years.
What's interesting is how meeting somebody can change your life. Probably if you never met Frank Costello.
Oh my God.
That's what opened the world. I mean, you were a guy who was sickly, didn't have anyone backing them, didn't have really much of a home life or parents or education.
Oh, no.
But Frank Costello changed your life. I mean, that's really the key to becoming who Gianni Russo became.
Well, it's funny you're saying that. This is his apartment.
Yeah.
12-room apartment. He left me on 61st Street. And I have a few of them in the building because he left them.
I know. You tell me, but it's and
oh, you're right. Though Costello was a father figure like no other, and I didn't know who he was. I met him on the streets when I was selling ballpoint pens. They just came out, and he used to go into the Sherry Netherlands every day. After I exhausted selling ballpoint pens downtown and Wall Street area and all that, I took the train one day just to come uptown. I'd never been uptown. And when I was in Bellevue, I finally got the window seat and the window bed, and I saw the Empire State Building from my room, which is the tallest building I ever saw, because downtown everything is 6-7 stories the most. And then I said, I'm going to go uptown. And thank God I did, because I got out on the Central Park side on Fifth Avenue. I walked across the street, and even doing research, like we were talking about earlier with AI and all that,
right.
The Daily News took a picture of me selling ballpoint pens in front of the Sherry Netherlands with my gimp arm. And this is all part of my show right now. And people, all I keep hearing is oohs and ahs. Nobody knows all the nostalgia in this show. And it's all factual. It's all about my life. But Costello used to come all the time and never took a pen. He'd give me words of advice. give me $5, sometimes $10. I was like $100 bill in the 50s.
Hmm.
And he'd always hug me, and making sure his hand was on my left shoulder, hugging me. And it wasn't for months went by till I found out while I was downtown about the Sicilian logorns, the horns and the things that people wear. Next door to Ferrara's is a place, it's still there, Ernie Russo's. They sell all Catholic artifacts. I still buy rosaries there and all that. But he showed me a logorn from Sicily and it had a hunchback on it. I had a hunchback guy on top of where the pepper was. I said, "What's that about?" He said, "Well, Sicilians are superstitious in touching cripples. They touch them for luck." Well, the blood drained from my face because
Wow.
this guy was giving me money for months already. Well, I couldn't wait to get up there that day. On the train station, they were selling a little rabbit's feet, in purple and red and all that. I bought one for 10 cents. I put it in my pocket. And sure enough, this guy came every day from 10:30 to 11 o'clock. He'd come down. And I didn't know what he was doing in the Sherry and others. He used to get his shoes shined in the barbershop and then come out and go to the Waldorf. That's where he started his day every day in Peacock Alley. And that day, when he came out again, he did his normal thing, give me words of wisdom for the day. And that day, he gave me $5. And he goes to touch me, and I move. He goes to touch me again, and I move. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "No, it's not what I'm doing." Now, understand, this is Frank Costello. I didn't even know who the guy was.
Yeah.
And I thought the guy with him was his friend. It was his bodyguard. He says, "What are you doing?" I said, "No, it's what you're doing." And I had my left side was still gimped for a couple more years. I said, "You're touching me like I'm some kind of freak. I thought you liked me." And he was almost embarrassed because that's what he was doing.
Yeah.
Because I got something for luck for you. And I gave him this pink rabbit's foot. And he said to Blackie, "You believe this kid?" He said, "What's your name?" I said, "I ain't telling you my name." He said, "Now tell me your name." He got stern. I didn't want, he wasn't a small guy.
Yeah.
So I told him my name. I said, "Gianni Russo." He says, "Who's Angelo Russo to you?" I said, "My great uncle." He said, "When did you see him last?" I said, "I never saw him at all." He said, "Why is that?" I said, "Well, if you know so much, tell me." He says, "I'm telling you now, answer my questions." And he was getting heated. I said, "Well, because they hung him in 1949 with a couple of other relatives of mine because they were trying to break up La Cosa Nostra. And what most people don't know, they left them hanging in the streets till they rotted to send the message that they were going to abolish La Cosa Nostra, which they never did. But my cousin sent Costello here. My cousin sent Carlo Gambino here when he was 17 as a made man. He came from Sicily as a made man to clean up the Moderano gang that was coming here, who were picking on the Italian immigrants, shaking them down for money. When they found that out, that's how they created the Five Families then.
Wow.
And
Gianni, we can go on forever. And I love talking to you, but I do want, because I know a lot of my viewers would love to see your show and hear more. I mean, you're one of those guys you can talk to for hours, and there's so many stories, and we haven't talked about Marilyn Monroe, we haven't talked about the Kennedys. There's so much. But if someone wants to see your show, which is an incredible show, where would they go to find out about you? Do you have a website?
Just go on my website. I mean, we have a couple. Hollywood Godfather has all my things up. My own website, GianniRusso.com.
Right.
All of that's up there. I'm playing all over, thank God. I'm doing 8 states in the next couple of months. I'm doing a lot of stuff around the New York area. So, because I like taking trains instead of planes right now.
Right. Yeah.
And I mean, that's, and I like people to come and see it because there is a lesson to be learned by this.
I haven't seen you perform probably in a couple of years, so I have to come see it. I haven't seen the new show. I know you have a new show.
Oh my God!
And I'm definitely going to get on your website and make sure that I get to see. I haven't seen you in a while.
Well, let me know. You be my guest whenever you pick.
But I do have we have some time limit, so I want to thank you for being on the Mark, and I do want to talk to you soon. And it's just a fascinating story. He's a fascinating person, and the history of the United States, not just the mob, is in this man. And it's someone that you should read about. You should listen to his podcasts, and you should definitely see his show. He's actually can sing pretty well too. We haven't discussed that, but he's a pretty damn good singer. He's not Frank Sinatra, but he's pretty good.
Well, Sinatra taught me how to sing. I'm the only guy that can say Sinatra taught me how to sing, and Marlon Brando taught me how to act.
All right. Well, thank you, Gianni, and thank you for being on the Mark.
No, thank you. I really appreciate it.
Thank you.
I hope you enjoyed this episode of On the Mark. I started this podcast by quoting John F. Kennedy and would like to end it with quoting one of my favorite baseball players, Nolan Ryan. Enjoying success requires the ability to adapt. Only by being open to change will you have a true opportunity to get the most from your talent. I wish you success in staying ahead of the curve instead of behind the 8 ball. Thank you for tuning in.